This is your daily dose of ethics. Today we will be discussing the seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. We will be looking at a definition of adultery. What is adultery? Then we will look at why is adultery a sin. Then we will look at the importance of chastity, followed by a look at the offences against chastity, including lust, masturbation, fornication, pornography, prostitution, rape, and finally, homosexuality. Then we will look at the purpose and sanctity of marriage. And finally, we will look at offences against the dignity of marriage. The definition of adultery is a married person has sex with anybody other than their spouse. Conversely, where anybody has sex with a married person who is not their spouse. This is different to the definition of fornication, which is sex between an unmarried man and an unmarried woman. Why is adultery a sin? Well, the purpose of marriage is the union of man and woman to procreate. Any sexual act that is not meant for procreation within the marriage between husband and wife is a sin. Married persons take an oath of fidelity, and adultery is a breaking of that oath, which reverberates through society by harming its fundamental unit, the family. Infidelity is an offence against the oath to your spouse and your children. Your children are entitled to grow up in a loving unity of mother and father. In an act of adultery, it is unlikely that the marital union will last or be healthy. Why so much emphasis on adultery? Because I believe that adultery is a gateway sin, as witnessed in the story of David, who escalated lust to adultery and then finally to murder. How often have we seen this repeated in society in the last 2,000 plus years? Adultery can lead to the breaching of all of the other 9 commandments. And we look specifically now at them. 1. Worship no God but me. And 2. Do not make for yourself idols. How often do we worship or idolize the person we have an affair with? 3. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. Most of us, when we get married, make an oath before God, and adultery is a breach of that oath. Continuing with the theme of adultery as a gateway crime, we move on to the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Very often murder involves the murder of either your own spouse or the spouse of your fellow adulterer in order to be with your fellow adulterer. Remember also the story of David. The 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Very often adulterers will commit fraud and or theft to finance the upkeep of their fellow adulterer or mistress. Some adulterous couples may even use collusion to commit fraud, theft together to finance their relationship. The 9th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not lie. Adultery must lead to deception and lies to any and all parties concerned, even between the adulterers. Next, we will be discussing the importance of chastity. Chastity is an exercise in self-control. This self-control can be the foundation for governing your passions or being dominated by them. Remember the saying, a moment of madness, a lifetime of sadness. Chastity is one of the 7 virtues. The other 6 virtues are humility, generosity, admiration, temperance, forgiveness, and diligence. And these virtues also have counters, and these are called the 7 deadly sins, which are lust, pride, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Self-mastery is a long and exacting work that is Offences against chastity continued. Lust is an unrestrained enjoyment of sex, be it fantasy or actual. Jesus said, "Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Masturbation almost always involves a form of fantasy, whether visual or imagined, and can become a force of acquired habit. So too, fornication, sex between unmarried persons, can become a force of acquired habit. Pornography offends against chastity because it perverts the conjugal act, the intimate giving of spouses to each other. It does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, the actors, the vendors, the public, since each one becomes an object. Continuing with offences against chastity, prostitution does injury to the dignity of the person who engages in it, reducing the person to an instrument of sexual pleasure. The one who pays sins gravely against himself. He violates the chastity to which his baptism pledged him and defiles his body, the temple of the Holy Spirit. Prostitution is a social scourge. Rape is the forcible violation of the sexual intimacy of another person. Rape deeply wounds the respect, freedom, and physical and moral integrity to which every person has a right. It causes grave damage that can mark the victim for life. Graver still is the rape of children committed by parents in the case of incest, or those responsible for the education